So good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Pam Clark-Reidenbach, and I am the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence, also known as NICNE. Also with us today doing the tech is Billy Callahan, Associate Director for NICNE. These training sessions are provided through the Youth Mental Health System of Care, a variety of youth serving providers and parents of children with lived experience working to build a comprehensive, high-quality mental health system that is affordable, equitable, and accessible to all. The design of the system of care, including these trainings, are made possible by a grant from the Children's Healthcare Foundation. The trainings are the start of a community of practice for youth serving mental health service providers. After today's session, you'll receive additional information on how you can get engaged in the system of care. Don't hesitate to reach out to Billy or I or any members of the system of care to learn more. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Kevin Polkey is a licensed clinical social worker, certified alcohol and drug counselor, certified school social worker, executive coach, former football and strength coach, and personal trainer. Kevin has worked with individuals, families, and organizations in areas of Illinois and Wisconsin, and currently works with individual clients and their families at KP Counseling. He also facilitates 3 men's groups, conducts workshops and seminars, and serves as a consultant to businesses, schools, and churches. In 2010, Kevin founded Four Corners Wellness, which has evolved into a company that produces workshops and trainings, business consulting, and executive coaching. In 2016, Kevin founded Shatter Our Silence, a nonprofit company to increase awareness and educate on the factors that lead to suicide in young adults. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. He is involved in a variety of different things. He's launched a weekly podcast called Polky-The Journey, based on stories and conversations with individuals regarding their journey of transformation from setbacks to soaring. He's about to air his 130th episode. In 2020, Kevin added to his executive director position by taking over the same role at Red Oak Counseling at their Elm Grove and Oak Creek locations in Wisconsin. He volunteers at local schools, churches, teaching youth and young adults classes on a variety of psychosocial, spiritual material. He is active on a variety of nonprofit boards of directors for local agencies. Kevin's favorite activities outside of KP Counseling and Red Oak Counseling, including spending time with family, exercising, supporting the arts, reading, and enjoying God's presence through nature. Whew, that makes me exhausted just reading it, Kevin. Thank you so much for being with us, Kevin. Please help me to welcome Kevin Polkey.
Well, thank you, Pam. At some point in there, I was starting to get bored with that own stuff, but I appreciate all the accolades, and it'll completely. We'll have to skip one whole slide today, so that we're good with that one then. So, but thank you very much, Pam. And just to reiterate, I know we are going to have some questions. We got about 1.5 hours to 2 hours worth of content, and but if for some of you who have seen me do a workshop before, I try to make it as interactive as possible. It's a little bit more challenging now with it being on Zoom than in person, but with the chat feature, we will be utilizing a way for you. I'm going to be asking some questions, and if you could put your response in the chat feature, and then Billy will read those off, and then we'll have a little bit of opportunity for that interaction. And at the very end, if you do have any comments or questions about any of the slides or the stories, definitely write those down, and we will do the best we can to address those toward the end of the presentation. We're going to be doing a combination of different things. I'm going to introduce maybe some new ideas. For a lot of you, it's going to be ideas that you have already been introduced to, but the key is, how do we implement this into our daily life? I feel pretty strongly that if we take these concepts and put them into our life on a daily, weekly basis, then we're more likely to be able to see opportunities to implement them into our students' lives and to the youth that we work with. So let's go ahead and get started. This circle is symbolic of the concept of Joseph Campbell's work in the hero's journey. And many of you are probably familiar with his work, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But I was first introduced to Campbell's work in the early 90s as I was making a transition from my earlier career, or if I'm being honest, probably how I identified myself as a competitive athlete. I was a football player and wrestler in high school and started bodybuilding during that time period and continued bodybuilding until my early 20s. For me, that was, according to this circle, that was order. That was my familiar. That was my norm. Some of you may even remember what that was like prior to March of 2020, that there was a familiar or a norm. When my career ended as a competitive athlete, I was plunged into this time period of disorder, of searching on how I was going to recreate myself, trying to figure out what dragons I needed to face, what dragons weren't going to let me go until I faced them, what things that I didn't want to recreate in my life, meaning the same mistakes. In the midst of doing that, there was a 2-year time period, and this disorder phase is sometimes called the initiation phase or the dark night of the soul. Collectively, we may, as a country, we may, as a society as a whole, and definitely we as educators and people who work in the helping profession, have been in this disorder over the last year and a half. But as Campbell points out to us, what we learn about ourselves in the disorder phase will prepare us for the reorder or the return home. And I know for me, what I learned as a competitive athlete at the state and national level, the pieces of plastic that I won when I won titles are probably less important than those lessons I learned on the way to the stage. Those were the things that allowed me then later to develop into a therapist, into an entrepreneur, into a business leader. Those were the things that I learned. It had less to do with what I accomplished either on the football field or on a stage. It had more to do with those things that I had to do in preparation for it, mentally, physically, emotionally during that time period. A year ago, well, a little bit more than that, when all the different aspects of what was shutting down, school shutting down, sanctions were being placed on our businesses, how we were going to practice. I was concerned about my employees. I was concerned about my clients. I didn't want to have to lay anybody off. I didn't want to have to have any break in continuing care for my clients. I remember feeling very afraid, and one was the next thing that was going to happen. I remembered thinking to myself, so this is what that little chicken felt like when the sky was falling all the time. And I knew for me, after a while, a couple of weeks of this, I knew that I couldn't continue in that way. I was fortunate that I had started studying Campbell's work and Ryan Holiday's work, which I'm going to introduce to you in a little bit, was that what opportunity can I find in this chaos? There was enough chaos going on. I didn't have to worry about that. But instead of being afraid of another thing happening in the midst of this disorder phase, what opportunities for growth and development personally, but also industry-wise and business-wise? I've used this template numerous times in my life. And this is what the invitation is going to be for you to initially reintroduce this template to you, so that you can, in those time periods, regardless if it's in your personal life, in your family life, in your career, or with your students or youth that you work with, how to use this template in which to find some guidance as you navigate through those darker times. So this is a simplistic way of breaking down the stages of Campbell's journey. So we have a hero or heroine at the top of the circle, and they're called out of their norm. Let's say they may be a young girl who has a small dog who's restless of being on the farm with her aunt and uncle. And so she takes off the farm. And when she takes off the farm, she meets some strange person, and that scares her and she wants to head back home. But something supernatural happens, and she's thrust from Kansas to this land of Oz. Now, there she finds a mentor, the Good Witch of the North, and she finds 3 helpers to go on her journey with them. Now, each one of those helpers also have their own journey they're on. They're all looking for something. She just wants to go back home. The ruby slippers represent something that is precious to her, a gift that she received, something that lies within her, similar to that lies within all of us. But of course, in any story, there's going to have to be some type of a dark side or some villain to the story who wants that most precious gift that she has and wants to get in the way of her accomplishing what she wants, which is to return home. In the midst of it, she has to face those fears of this ugly green witch, flying monkeys, poppy seeds, and really not knowing where she's going at all. But as she addresses those things, and as she finds out that no one else, even a wizard, can't be the one who's going to help accomplish this for her, it is her journey. It is her path that she has to do this with. Her heart breaks as she peers behind the curtain to find out that the wizard is not all powerful. She then recognizes, as the wizard tells her, that all she needs to do is click her heels twice. And as we know, as she returns back home, that she wakes from a dream to find out that home was with her the entire time. See, every great story and movie today follows this circle. The reason why we're drawn to them is because they speak to the hero or the heroine within us. Now, you, Pam, Billy, everyone else in the audience, you are the heroine or the hero of your story. But when it comes to working with our youth, working with our clients, working with our students, you're not the hero of their story. They have to be the hero of their story. You're their guide. You're their Rafiki, or for short people like me, Yoda. You are their guide or teacher or mentor or sponsor as they navigate through their stories. But for me, I believe the best way to start internalizing these tools or templates is, how do we bring them into our own life? How do we start looking at how do we introduce them first into our own lives? And that's really what this workshop is going to be about. So first, I'd like you, as you go through these next 2 hours, I want you to just do the best you can to try to stay focused on just you. And I know for us who are helpers, that's sometimes hard to do, because we'll get an idea and think about somebody we want to help, implement it with. But I think the more that we can internalize these tools and how do we apply them to our own life, I think they'll be more readily available once we work with our clients or students. I'm going to skip this slide, except for the bottom of the slide. I do want to share that I've been very fortunate to be with my wife for the last 29 years. She's also a Rockford native. She graduated from East High and then Northern Illinois University with a fine arts degree. The reason why I share that is because her love for art and her utilization of art to express her creativity has then carried over to our 2 young adult children. It's really weird when your children are in their 20s to still refer to them as children, but some of you guys know what I mean. My oldest is, he's my football player who also then stopped playing ball in college and pursued a degree in social work, and he works at KP now. And then my daughter, who just finished her bachelor's degree in social work and will start her master's in a few weeks at Aurora University. She's my performing artist. Caleb had a minor in printmaking, and he followed the pursuits of the arts that way. Sierra, who could have been a great athlete if she would have pursued that, chose the arts and the performing arts specifically. I think we, Diane and I, are very fortunate that our young adult children have pursued certain aspects of what each one of our lives have been. Now they're going to form their own path and do it their own way. Some of it will be aspects of what we modeled for them or what we introduced to them, but it's a building upon process, similar to the different mentors and people in your life. I think that's what happens in our personal life as well. I'll speak next month more about Shatter Our Silence, which is a nonprofit that focuses on raising awareness and education on the risk factors that lead to young adult suicide. So everything else, Pam did a phenomenal job explaining, so we won't go over that stuff. So what are we going to talk about today? I've already introduced Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey and how it can apply to our life. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of a threat response and some techniques for completing the stress cycle. I'm going to introduce the concept of grit and the importance of that for success. And then we're going to finish off with 5 steps to develop resiliency within yourself and then within the individuals that you work with. So this is the workshop. That's why we don't call it a seminar. It's a workshop. So this is where you got to do some, there's no homework per se to it. It's just, this is where you write down. So if you could put in the chat room, what is one thing that you are grateful for today? What's one thing you're grateful for today? If you could just put that in the chat room, as the responses come in, I'm going to have just Billy share them.
We'll share these as they come in. So we have people sharing they're thankful for their sobriety, their health, the sun, their friends, their family, their daughter, their children, their husband and sons, nature, their furry babies, they have pets, their sight, their supportive family, that their son's surgery went well yesterday. Congratulations. Their daughter, a lot about family and children and spouses, health in their career, their puppies, Chai and Mocha, very cute, a restful night's sleep and waking up in the morning, just to be alive, my resilience, family and friends, grateful for their health and husband, their job, sleeping with no dreams last night, their grandchildren, thankful for one more day, grateful for well-being and resilience, supportive community, the gift of life, having a great place to work, health and another opportunity to live, stability, husband and children, their cats, connection to many people during this time of separation, living and breathing, the strength to go on, being able to walk through their neighborhood and enjoy nature, life itself. Someone shares that they have no physical pain this morning. Grateful to be a role model for their children, their pandemic garden, God's grace and mercy, their son recovering from a respiratory illness, being happy, sense of humor, life, love, and family.
Well, Billy, thank you. And those are all phenomenal responses. I want to, when we study resilience and how to foster resilience within students, the research shows that to be able to cultivate that, we need to start with an attitude of gratefulness. As I've been spending the last 4 years working with my staff at the couple different counseling locations, we do an exercise that we start off every meeting, every clinical meeting with what's one thing you're grateful for in the past week. And sometimes it lasts 10 minutes and sometimes it lasts much, much longer and we never get to anything that I'm going to do in the meeting. But what I've realized over time, I think what the research is revealing in that is that regardless of where I am prior to coming into that meeting, as I start reflecting on what I'm grateful for and listening to what other people are grateful for, regardless of the frame of mind I'm in, I go from a closed mind to an open mind. My thinking becomes a little bit more palatable and pliable when I'm open to what I'm grateful for. I don't need a lot of practice being closed-minded. All I have to do is conjure up some type of thought of some type of threat or something that's going to change, and I can easily slip back into that closed-minded and find some supporting thoughts to keep that going. So I have to be intentional about being open and being open-hearted. And I think this exercise of asking what I'm grateful for is something that's been useful for me. And then when I do it with my clients or do it with in my different groups that I run, I've noticed the same thing start happening. Something starts softening. The next question, a little bit different. What's most important to you? And I want you to think about, this isn't necessarily just what I'm grateful for, but what's most important to you? If you can put those answers in.
We are getting responses such as family, their children, health, faith, their children being safe and happy, their daughter and their family, freedom, family's health, well-being, and happiness, family and friends, opportunities, being able to give their child their best life, good health, integrity, their husband, health, family, and job, helping others, family, children, and fur babies, their family safety, their life overall, their faith in their family, their health and loved ones, the relationship with Christ's family and provisions and safety, their close friends who are my family, happiness, purpose, honesty, children and peace, love and growth, contentedness with what they have, honesty, their mental health, feeling safe and supported, children, health and family, living out their purpose, peace of mind and good communication.
Perfect. Really, thank you. So I want you to keep in mind what you wrote down, what you were grateful for. Keep in the back of your mind what's most important to you. Now, this next exercise, I want you to first write down on a piece of paper or somewhere, not on the computer, but on a piece of paper next to you or something like that. And then I want you to pick the top one and put that in the chat. So what are the top 5 stressors or top 5 dragons that are in your life? And then as you write down those 5, discern which one is the top one, and then go ahead and put that in the chat room.
The responses that we're getting are CPTSD, health challenges, toxic people, places, and things, trauma and loss, school and work, finances, the need to have a plan and anxiety around that, living with bipolar disorder, caring for an elderly father, insomnia, marriage, broken trust, work, finances, health, COVID-19, indecision, loss, financial insecurities, preparing for a licensure exam, negative self-talk, fear of the unknown, their own expectations, time management, difficulty saying no, anxiety, worrying about their children's health and happiness, raising their child, work-life balance, communication issues, addiction, career decisions, co-parenting with an ex, themselves, regret, finances, house hunting, selfishness.
Perfect, Billy. Thank you. So I want us to remember back to the slide earlier that I pointed out with Campbell's example with his template in the hero's journey. And in that disorder phase, in that dark night of the soul phase, that is where the dragons lie. They're usually, not always, but usually there's some type of relationship between the things that we value most and the things that stress us out the most. Not always, but sometimes there's some type of stress or threat that's tied into the thing that I value the most, or one of the top 5 things that I value the most. So it's important as we look at ourselves, not only to have an attitude of gratefulness so that we can be open, being very cognizant of the energy that goes into the things that we value the most, and then recognizing what are those things in our life that threatens it. In psychobabble land, counseling, right? We talk about the idea of journaling, because if those thoughts are just rolling around in my head, it's hard for me to see them. But if I write them out, I might have a better shot of getting them from back here to in front of me, and I might then be able to start forming a plan, or at least identifying what's going on. This next video, or this first video that we're going to show, I want you to pay attention to our main character in the video and what he's going through, and there's a concept called confirmation bias that has become very pronounced over the past year, 2 years or so. It's simplistically what it is that I have a viewpoint about something, and then I'm going to seek out more information to support my bias. I'm going to ignore information that's contrary to it because, well, I want to support what I'm already thinking. This can go in a life-taking way or a life-giving way, depending on what we're doing, what we're trying to confirm. Let's watch the video and see how our main character confirms his bias.
please. Excuse me. Out. Let's get off, please. Excuse me.
So this obviously was made before COVID came in, or we would have had a different type of treatment that was they were going toward. But as you watched our main character, he had something that he was afraid of, and it was afraid that the elevator wasn't gonna be able to hold them. So instead of trusting the process, which it appeared everyone else in the elevator was doing, he started calculating how much people weighed, to the point where he then thought the only way that he could avoid this was to escape, and thought he had done a good job in that until he jumped into an elevator where everyone was sick with the swine flu. Now, this is supposed to be, it was supposed to be a funny video about sometimes how when our stress becomes elevated, when we become threatened, that sometimes what we do is make our situation worse than it is. His first fear that he had would be potentially not based in rational thinking, because there may not have been anything at all wrong with the elevator. So what happens to our body when we feel threatened? Well, we're not going to spend too much time, but I do think it's important that we know what happens to our body when we perceive something is threatening. In our case here, our main character perceived that the elevator was unsafe. So his sympathetic nervous system kicked in and prepared him to either fight or flight. Adrenaline and cortisol was going through his system. Now, it would be probably inappropriate for him to start yelling and screaming and pushing people around in the elevator. So when opportunity came up, he escaped. Now, the fact that in this particular case, he jumped from one elevator into another threatening situation, and now we could just carry on the story that maybe he continued to feel threatened. See, normally when you escape something like that, or you utilize the chemicals to fight something, what happens afterwards is a restoration time period, or when your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and your body is able to rest and digest. In other words, restore itself. But if we are in a constantly feeling threatened, constantly in this stress cycle, and we don't do anything with the chemicals, what we then are doing is setting ourselves up for not only some physical problems with inflammation and other types of aspects of our body breaking down, but we can then lead to what we call in the work world is burnout. We need to be able, that we are going to have things that are going to threaten us. That's a natural part of life. But we also need to build in capacity for the parasympathetic nervous system also to kick in for us to restore ourselves. So the stress cycle simply is stage one, alarm. That's thinking the elevator is going to crash because there's too many people on it. That there's some level of resistance. Either we're going to escape or we're going to fight something. And if we don't have a break from that, have a time for a reprieve, and we continue the cycle over and over again, going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, then the third piece will happen, and that's exhaustion. So Amelia and Emily Nagasaki, they did some research on this idea of completing the stress cycle. What they did essentially, I'm going to let them explain it in this video, but they essentially said, in our modern day life, we typically, as a general rule, don't have a tiger or a wolf or a bear outside of our door. Most of our stressors are mental or emotional. In other words, our perception of something threatening us, like our friend in the elevator did, becomes real life. And our brain cannot differentiate between a tiger or I think the elevator is unsafe. It's going to respond with the same amount of chemicals going through our system. But most of us attempt to be socially appropriate, so we don't go running around, or we don't go fighting things and fighting people and tearing stuff up. What we do is we try to be calm, have it act like it doesn't bother us. So that means we suppress those chemicals, and then we try to not bring it home. So we suppress it at home, but we find ourselves frustrated because our daughter or our son asked us for the 10th time when we're going to eat. And you kept just saying, just a second. And they did wait a second, and then they asked again, because that's what little ones do. Them being that way is normal. Us not being able to be tolerant is because we haven't done anything to complete the stress cycle, or at least one aspect of that. Let's see what they have to say about this in this video.
The stress response cycle is a biological process in our bodies. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like all the biological processes. Unfortunately, there is a disconnect in modern human life between what activates the stress response and what completes the stress response cycle. So the things that actually cause our stress, like traffic and our kids and money and the fate of the world, are not things that we can escape from, like a lion, which is what the stress response is built for. It's to help us run away from the lion. Instead,
things you can do to complete the stress response cycle, separate from whether or not you solve any of the problems that caused your stress, are, number one, run. Any physical activity that makes your body feel as though it has escaped from a lion. It could be actually running, or the elliptical machine, or your Zumba class, or just dancing it out to Beyonce in your kitchen, or just tightening all your muscles for 10 slow counts and then relaxing them. That's going to allow your body to feel like it's in a safe place again. Or if that's not effective for you, and it's not for everybody, a 20-second hug. Finding someone you love and trust enough to hug for 20 seconds. 20 seconds is an awkwardly long hug if you don't really like the person that you're hugging. So someone that you do like and trust enough to hug for 20 seconds. You support your own weight, either standing over your own center of gravity or sitting. Wrap your arms around the person and let your body return to a state of safety. With the change of neurochemicals, your heart rate will lower, your blood pressure will decrease, and you'll feel totally different, just 20 seconds. And third, a good night's sleep. Sleep is important for so many reasons, but one of the many, many, many things that can complete the stress response cycle is an actual full night's sleep. It's actually true that if you sleep on it, you'll feel better in the morning.
So again, in the midst of looking at some research, if there's just one thing that you take out of this presentation, this workshop today, and work at implementing it into your daily life, into your weekly life, I would highly encourage this be the thing. Not that I don't like Campbell's work and Holiday's work that I'm going to get to in a little bit, but this particular thing in itself will probably pay out in dividends more than anything else, because this is literally giving your body an opportunity to get back to a homeostasis. As a general rule, this morning was a good example. So I have a routine. On certain days of the week, I get up at certain time periods and I do certain things. And knowing that I had this presentation first thing in the morning, my routine on a Tuesday morning was get up at 5, do some stretching, do my normal exercise program, do some meditation, and then I'm ready for the day. And knowing that I had this to go on, I wanted to even more so make sure that I was in a mental and emotional, spiritual good place. Now, when I get done tonight, and tonight's Tuesday, so I'll be finishing up about 7:30 tonight or so. I don't know for sure what's gonna go on today, either with clients or with staff or whatever may be going on. But I know that if I go home and I'm driving home overthinking something that happened, or I get stuck in a loop about something that is stressing me out, I know that the first thing I need to do when I go home is go and exercise or move. Yep, it's going to be 7:45, 8 o'clock when I get home, but the dog's going for a walk. I'm going to go down in the elliptical. I'm going to go do something because when I get done with that, I want to be present for my wife. Now, the situation isn't going to change at all. Whatever's stressing me out is exactly how it's going to be. But I know that those chemicals that I got going through my body are going to get displaced, get utilized, and then mentally and emotionally, I'll be in a better place. 1, to be present for her. 2, so my body can get into that para. Now, that I don't consider that a workout. My workout was this morning. I utilize that literally to burn off those chemicals. Now, someone else may go, well, I don't want to work out twice a day. I'm not a morning person. I'm like, perfect. Then work out or do some type of exercise in the evening after you get off work, before you go home, whatever that may be. That's my go-to all the time. Other things to complete the stress cycle is doing something that's creative, out of your normal, to allow yourself to be inside of some type of creative space. Caleb loves this one. Numerous times when he was in college and in graduate school, I would go down to his living space and I would hear this, like I thought he was by himself in the room, and I would find out that he was listening to a stand-up comedian. That laughter for him was the thing that allowed him to de-stress or complete the stress cycle. For any of the guys in the audience, we know that we're not a big fan of this one, but it actually is really good. This idea of allowing yourself to let your guard down and be able to cry, not only does it do some things emotionally really well for you, but then also it has the physical release, and again, is completing that stress cycle. I do agree with what the sisters were saying. I do stress the idea that you should ask permission before you hug someone for 20 seconds. If not, you may have some other stressors in your life, but physical affection as well. And then the idea of deep breathing, and I'm going to introduce a couple of those here in a second. But develop what works for you, because allowing your body to burn off those chemicals is going to allow you to have that longevity in the long term. But on the short term, it is going to allow you to be able to keep that work or whatever it is at work or in the car. And then when you enter your home, you're able to actually be there and not have to bring it home with you. So some exercise to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. I've been using tapping or emotional freedom technique for an extended period of time. Initially, it was introduced to me to help with pain relief. I think it helped a little bit with that, but it definitely helped with a grounding technique. Box breathing or combat breathing is a technique of breathing in through your nose for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, breathing out through your mouth for a count of 4, holding that for a count of 4, and then doing that 4 times. That is an easy one to do. You can do that in the car, or you can do that, if you need to step away from something. That's another good technique for grounding and activating the para. And then the same technique, but on the exhale part, extending the exhale to the count of 8. Left nostril breathing is another part of activating that part of our brain and activating the parasympathetic. And then practicing belly breathing. We can do that one real quick. Take your left hand and put on your stomach, and your right hand on your chest. Breathing in through your nose and raising your stomach. As you're breathing in, notice your stomach raising as you're breathing into your stomach. And out through your mouth. When we breathe in and our chest lifts, that means we're breathing in through our lungs, primarily, top breathing. If we focus on breathing in and forcing the air into our diaphragm, that is what activates the para. So just that belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing can also then utilize as a grounding technique as well. All these are different ways. We're not going to be able to eliminate the stressors in our life. We may be able to reframe them a little bit, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's more important that we know how to recover from it than try to eliminate them.
Kevin, someone had asked if you would be able to share anything about vagus nerve stimulation or how that process works.
You know, I would love it. I don't know enough about it to say that there's a difference. My first response, I started studying or looking into the vagus nerve stimulation when when my daughter was struggling with anxiety, like 5-6 years ago. And from what I remember of it, it seemed like there was a lot of similarities to activating the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning the deep breathing, utilizing some of the techniques I just talked about. That was what I recall of it. If someone has more information about that, I mean, I don't have enough of it to know for sure, but I think that's what I remember about that. Sorry about that. Now it looks like I got homework, Pam. Gee. Richard Rohr is an individual that I've been following for a while, and he is a Franciscan priest who has a center, it's called the Center of Contemplation and Action out in New Mexico. And he talks about the idea that similar to stressors in our life, that suffering is an inevitable part of life. That if we value things, if we have love for something or someone, that because of life, there will be loss. And with that loss will come suffering. For some of us, there's been traumatic loss. For some of us, there's been trauma in our life. Regardless of it being a setback or of it being some type of trauma in our life, we have a choice in that suffering. That if we don't transform our pain, it's almost certain that we're going to transmit it. That pain and loss and suffering are part of our life experience. The opportunity comes in the choice of either transmitting it because we're not dealing with it and we're just suppressing it, or utilizing Campbell's work in the hero's journey, saying now, because of this loss, we've now got thrust into something. This is the opportunity to face those dragons, those witches, those whatever, and transform into the hero that we were intended to be. This next video that I'm going to share with you is the speaker is Jim Collins. And Jim Collins, I was first introduced to Jim Collins 10, 15 years ago when I read his book, Good to Great. It was a book on businesses that went from good and went to great, and other similar businesses that dropped off and closed. And one of the individuals he researched was Admiral Stockdale. Admiral Stockdale was, during the Vietnam War, he had crashed his plane and was captured by the Vietnamese and was held as a prisoner of war. And because he was an admiral, they had a vested interest to try to get him to, in their propaganda, to turn on the United States and betray the United States. And Stockdale refused to do that. Let's watch this video of Jim Collins talking about Admiral Stockdale and his interview with him, and how he used him as an example of a level 5 leadership.
I would like to give you a way of thinking that has been enormously helpful to me, that came from the Good to Great research for dealing with great difficulty. And it was what we came to call the Stockdale paradox. And the Stockdale paradox was taught to us by, when we were doing the Good to Great research, we're trying to make sense of the CEOs. And in doing that, I just by chance happened to get to know Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking military officer in the Hanoi Hilton, shot down in 1967, was there till 1974. They could pull him out at any time and torture him, and they did. They tortured over 20 times. And I had the privilege to get to know Admiral Stockdale, and we were going to the faculty club one day, and I had read his book In Love and War, which was written in alternating chapters by himself and his wife about their years when he was in the camp. And I got depressed reading the book because it seemed so bleak, it seemed so difficult, it seemed, you know, it's like we can all endure anything if we know it's going to come to an end and we know when. But what if you don't know if it's ever going to come to an end? And you certainly don't know when. So I asked Admiral Stockdale how he dealt with that, and he said, you have to realize I never got depressed because I never, ever wavered in my faith that not only I would get out, but I would turn being in the camp into the defining event of my life that in retrospect I would not trade. Later, when we were up the hill, I asked him, I said, Admiral Stockdale, who didn't make it out as strong as you? And he said, easy, it was the optimists. I said, the optimists? You sounded optimistic. He said, no, I was not optimistic. I never wavered in my faith that I would prevail in the end, but I was not optimistic. I said, what's the difference? Well, the optimists always thought we'd be out by Christmas. Of course, Christmas would come and it would go. And then we were going to be out by Easter and Thanksgiving, and then Christmas would come again, and they died of a broken heart. And that's when Admiral Stockdale grabbed me by the shoulders and said, this is what I learned. When you're imprisoned by great calamity, by great difficulty, by great uncertainty, you have to, on the one hand, never confuse the need for unwavering faith that you will find a way to prevail in the end, with, on the other hand, the discipline to confront the most brutal facts we actually face. And we're not getting out of here by Christmas.
Like any paradox, it is between that phrase, a rock and a hard place. It's between these two aspects that we need to have an unwavering faith that you will prevail, that you will survive this, you will get on the other side of this loss, of this trauma, of this pandemic. But at the same time, we have to discipline ourselves to recognize that right now, right at this moment, the brutal facts are fill in the blank. That it is this uncomfortableness of any paradox. If it's easy, that's probably not a paradox. because it's about living in that tension between the two. Now, of course, the first time I heard this, right, you can just imagine being a person who prided himself, actually probably spoke about it, I haven't since then, about the idea of being half full, an optimist. But how many times in my life have I, with magical thinking, thought that something was going to come to an end, somehow have resolution by some given date that I placed out into the future, without necessarily any basis on why that would be, other than I want it to be done by a certain time period. I don't know, maybe it's natural to do that. I guess the alternative is I've also played the game where I've been half empty too, because I figured if I never have expectations about something, then I'll never be disappointed. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. Of course, that doesn't work very well. I just complain and I'm upset the whole way until the Bears play, and then still upset when the Bears lose too. It didn't help matters. It just ruined the time all the way up to it and the game. And then afterwards, I was still disappointed. This year, it's going to be completely different though. I have facts. No, I'm just joking. But I think this idea of being able to hear Stockdale talk about, obviously extremely familiar to Viktor Frankl. It's similar to Mandela's story, similar to Gandhi's story, similar to Martin Luther King's story. These stories are very similar, that they had to find a way of living within the paradox. That as we attempt to be leaders in our own lives and for the ones that we work with, that we need to find examples of how others navigated through these time periods. So what do we call this? Well, we call this grit, right? It's kind of a cool word, at least I think it's kind of a cool word, right? That it's this idea that Stockdale and Frankl and King and Mandela, they had grit. They had this perseverance that regardless of what was going, regardless of what the circumstances were, that they were going to prevail. That no matter what you do to me, you can't break my spirit. I can hang on to that aspect. So I do still believe that I can look at the brutal facts today, but still lean toward being half full versus half empty. That I think it's important that another important element of that grit is not only the perseverance, but that we have the perseverance to complete what we're passionate about. Dorothy wanted to return home. Stockdale wanted to be released and knew that when he was released, this would be the defining moment of his life. Not much different than Frankl when he was a prisoner in World War II. That this was where they were finding the information for what they became most known for. And it isn't by accident that we are helpers in the middle of a pandemic. I don't think that's by accident. Even though it's not been easy and it's not done, I'm grateful that the preparation and these types of opportunities have been available. So this idea that great works are performed not by strength, but more by perseverance. And we see these over and over again in different examples. We see just recently, to be an Olympiad, you have to have grit. And you have to have grit to say that I don't think I can do this right now too. But it's only because they knew what it was to push it to the line so many times. So grit is a little bit different than resilience, and I'll explain that with this next thing. But what we know about grit, when they've done research on looking at grit, is that grit is a greater indicator for success than IQ or talent. I know in my own coaching experience that I would see individuals, especially when I was working with younger athletes, student athletes, I would see individuals phenomenal gifted talent when they were in middle school, early, grade school and in middle school. They would literally run circles around some of the kids. That developmentally they were so much farther ahead, and they didn't play their senior year or junior year. That so many times individuals that were gifted intellectually never learned the perseverance of having to push them through when it got difficult. One of my most enjoyable experiences is when I was coaching a 7th grade football team. Of course, I accepted the position because I was offered it, and I wasn't smart enough to say no. But when I showed up and there was 73 7th graders, and I swear most of them had never seen a football before, and I had 2 other adults with me, we spent more time getting them dressed and warming up than we did anything else. It was like literally herding middle school cats. It was like anyways, but there was this boy that the mom, the second day of practice, I can't remember, the first day or second day of practice, early on, right? She walks up to me. We were just getting the kids ready for the practice, and she walks up to me, and this boy literally is hiding behind her left leg, kind of peering around her hip, because that's about how tall he was, peering, because she was really tall, peering around her leg as she talked to me and said her son wanted to play football. And he thought he could be a lineman. Okay. Slowly over that year, he became more and more comfortable being away from his mom. Slowly, with a lot of practice and a lot of intention, he learned how to not only stand like a football player, but move like a football player and do the plays that we had designed. And by the end of the year, this shy, couldn't stand by himself, ended up being our most improved player on the 7th grade team. His senior year, he was all conference and had an opportunity to play at Augustana. He was not in 7th grade our most talented player. That year in 7th grade, we had what later would have been the NICNE MVP, Athlete of the Year, a 3-time state champion wrestler. We had a ton of talent athletically. He was not one of them. But through grit and his own personal demons that he faced, he was able to be successful in his own right and reach his dreams that he wanted by going to college and playing football. He was super smart too, so he would have been going to college either way. But to me, that is grit, perseverance, and passion. Being able to face the brutal facts while you have unwavering faith that you will prevail. But now I want to introduce something a little bit different, and that's the idea of resilience, or when we have obstacles in our way, what can we do?
In ancient times, a king had his men place a huge rock on a roadway. He then hid in the bushes and watched to see if anyone would move the rock out of the way. Some of the king's wealthiest merchants and courtiers passed by and simply walked around it. Many blamed the king for not keeping the roads clear, but none of them did anything about getting the stone removed. And so it happened that one day, a peasant came along carrying vegetables. Upon approaching the rock, the peasant laid down his burden and tried to push the rock out of the way. After much pushing and straining, he finally managed. After the peasant went back to pick up his vegetables, he noticed a purse lying in the road where the rock had been. The purse contained many gold coins and a note from the king explaining that the gold was for the person who removed the rock from the road. You see, in life, every obstacle that we come across gives us an opportunity to improve our circumstances. And while the lazy complain, others will create opportunities through their kind hearts, generosity, and willingness to get things done. So see every problem as an opportunity and a chance to become better and to grow. This is Dare to Do Motivation Stories. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.
Just reflecting on that story real quick. Again, it's a metaphor. So it's a story that we're not to break down the reality of it, more what can we take from it. I don't believe that, I don't want to believe that people are intentionally putting obstacles in my way to see if I will learn the lesson. I think life does that well enough by itself. I think the point of it is that what do we do with the obstacles that are in our way? Are we like the rich people who walk by, just ignoring it, or blaming someone for moving my cheese? Or that's a different story. Putting the rock there? Or do we recognize that the obstacle is not supposed to be there? That we push against it and we pull against it. And even though it does not move, somewhere in there, another idea comes and we go get a lever. And we use leverage to move the obstacle. See, it isn't necessarily for the reward, because there may not necessarily be a literal purse of gold coin when the obstacle is removed. But I do know this: if you find a way to find the teacher within the obstacle, you will not be the same. So this idea of resilience, different than grit. Grit, remember, is perseverance, the perseverance to proceed through whatever the situation is, and pursue that thing that you're passionate most about. Resilience is a little bit different. It's the ability to overcome setbacks or obstacles quickly. It's the ability to mentally and emotionally cope with a crisis. In other words, come back to where you were at prior to the pre-obstacle or the pre-barrier. And it's the recovery time, right? So many times I hear my clients, I hear the students that I work with spend a lot of energy about the obstacle itself. Why is it there? Why does it have to be this way? Who did this? Why is it so unfair? It's not that those questions aren't important. I just don't know if they're important at the time they're asking it. Because yes, we need to make sure that we put attention to those questions so we can make systemic changes. That's true. But we also have to look at what things do I need to do to learn the initial lessons of the obstacle being there. So this idea of resilience is about overcoming setbacks or obstacles and what is my turnaround time. And sometimes I have to work at practicing it. Let's say if we have problems with frustration or anger, that maybe I have my recovery time goes from an hour to 30 minutes, and then from 30 minutes to 20 minutes, and from 20 minutes to 15. As long as I'm moving in the direction of progress, then I'm overcoming that obstacle. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk about 5 steps that I put together in how we develop resilience. So keep in mind, you know, the earlier research showed that when we're working with young people, specifically young people, but it qualifies for adults, is we need a level of openness. And that level of openness can get initiated, or you can invite somebody into it by asking them about what are they grateful for. The other thing I like most about doing that exercise, especially in a group setting, is because it allows people to learn things about other people in the group that they wouldn't learn if the question wasn't asked, which then can increase levels of empathy as well. The other aspect is as we look at stories in our own life in which we overcame obstacles, then it also allows us to more naturally see it in our students or our young people that we're working with. So being open through some way of gratitude or focusing on the things that are most important to us, and then looking at our own stories. So these next slides are talking about 5 steps where you can look at when you have been resilient, or the obstacles that you have in your life currently, where they can then later be a story for you. So the first number one thing I think is so important to keep in mind is that each and every one of us, as I said earlier, we have a bigger story that we're part of. That we are part of something greater than just what's directly right in front of us. If we look back on the people that have been instrumental in your life, you recognize that there were different players along your life that planted seeds that reinforce that there's some bigger story going on here. That when you go out to a mountain or you see something that is larger than you, you recognize that there is a bigger story happening here. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but you go and see something, you plan for a trip or whatever it may be. And then let's say you're taking a road trip out to the Rockies. And as you're on that road trip, you notice that something's not right with your car. And then you start becoming concerned about your vehicle. And you're so consumed about, is the vehicle going to make it, that you can't see outside of the car. That, I think, is how we can remove ourselves from the bigger story and become focused on if the elevator is going to make it or not. So what do we do in those situations? For me, because the reason I use that example is because that's happened to me more than once. That's why I use that example. And recognize, well, it may not be convenient, but that is why I paid for the AAA membership. That is why I have a cell phone. It's not going to be convenient, but it's not going to be vacation derailing. I may as well just continue driving the vehicle, paying attention to the dashboard, but continue recognizing there's more going on here. That it's critically important that if we are not able to practice self-care, we are not going to be able to do the next 3 steps. That if we don't discipline ourselves to take care of ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally. We are not going to be, no matter how smart we are not going to be able to do the things for ourselves as well for the people that we work with. So some examples of that, and it's just like Maslow talks about, that we need to first talk about our basic needs. A lot of us who are in the helping profession are not really good at taking care of ourselves first. But it's critical for us to take care of ourselves first so that we then exponentially can have impact on others. Adequate sleep, whatever that is for you, making sure that you're mindful of the proper nutrition of what you put into your body and what you don't put into your body, hydration, making sure that you're drinking enough water, and then regular exercise to make sure that the level of mobility and flexibility is constant. As I mentioned earlier, my some of my injuries later in life, some of them may have came from contact sports and years of bodybuilding. What I realized is that they also came from imbalance, that I didn't have the minor muscles developed as much as I had the major muscles developed. And that was what was causing lower back injuries and different types of things. So I had to go and then learn from someone about how to strengthen those muscles, just so that I wouldn't be in pain. That mentally, going through some of the things that we've been talking about, that we're taking care of ourselves physically and mentally, that emotionally, that we're taking care of ourselves through the breathing exercise that I mentioned earlier, giving ourselves time to unplug through meditation, through solitude. And again, meditation and solitude doesn't have to be in a locus position, staring at a candle. It can be walking. It could be being out in nature. There's a lot of different ways in which that can be. As I mentioned earlier, journaling is a great way of getting things out of your mind and not having to constantly worry about them or thinking about them. In AA, we talk about the idea of when you are too much in your own thinking, then go out and do service work. Help someone less fortunate. Pay it forward, they would say. Even if that's as simple as opening up the door for someone or buying someone coffee that's behind you. This idea of giving yourself permission to be curious and trying something new. And then spending time with individuals that you know who have stories of being resilient, or watching videos or reading about them. I know for me, at different time periods, the pandemic was one of them. When I started KP was another. When we went through the housing crisis, a decade or so ago, I went and looked in the history books about what did other leaders do during those time periods to see if there would be some clues that I could gather from them in the midst of that. But there's nothing easy about self-care. It takes discipline. And I would love to tell you, after 42 years of lifting weights, I would love to tell you that it gets easier. Nope, it's just familiar. But getting up at 5 in the morning still sometimes, I literally have to just convince myself to stand up, get dressed, if I know that if I get farther down the line, get out of bed, get dressed, go down to the gym, each step I'm less likely to turn around and go back to bed. But I know myself well enough, if I just lay there and think about it, there's a possibility I'll fall asleep and never get up. So I just have to take the first step. Like I said, I thought after 43 years it would be easier, but I'm waiting, maybe next month or something. this idea of practicing cognitive reframing. So we have our young person here. I want you to imagine this young lady. She is out in the woods. She's been walking there for a bit. She's realized that she doesn't know where she's at. She realizes that the sun may be going down. If you look closely at the picture, you might see off in the corner or in between the trees somebody or something waiting. You might even be able to see in the picture the anxiety that she's now about to experience because she's projecting what's going to happen. All right, erase all that from your mind for a second. See our young lady? She got up early this morning. This is her favorite time of the morning, favorite time of the day, because it's quiet and it's peaceful. The sun's been up for a little over an hour or so. This is her time with her creator, time for her to be grounded. Off over to the corner, she sees what she thinks is maybe a baby deer with its mom. Is it the same picture with just two different stories? The ability to see a picture and then reframe it is something that we talk about in counseling all the time. That idea of confirmation bias, if I think that something's going to jump out from behind one of the trees, I'm going to look for something jumping out from behind the tree. And that'll be the story that I'm telling myself. So in the midst of turning obstacles into opportunity, in the midst of reframing something, that we have to, according to Stockdale, we have to look at what are the facts. What's the objective piece? This is what's happened. The subjective part, that's the story that we tell ourselves. In the first story, our young lady is walking and she doesn't know where she's at. That's the objection. That's the fact. She may not be lost. She just may not know where she's at. In reference to landmarks where she would know. She doesn't have to make her story worse by adding in and projecting all the things that could go bad. It's not going to actually help her. It actually will probably hinder her. So we need to focus on what we can control and accept what we cannot control. You would think for us who've lived our entire lives or majority of our lives in Northern Illinois, you would think that we would have an easier time than this than other people living south of us. So we get to practice this at least 4 times a year. Well, definitely 2 times a year when the weather changes. No matter what we do and how much we complain, we cannot control the weather. We have to accept that it is, well, today it's supposed to be in the 90s and it appears the humidity will join it. And in about 6 months from now, it'll probably be below 0. And if you decide to wear the right clothes at the right time of year, it won't be that bad of an experience. But if you flip-flop them, it may not be as enjoyable. Focus on what you can control. I don't know if it would have made a difference yesterday in the downpour if you had an umbrella or not, because I think you still would have gotten wet. But I can't control the rain. I can control if I'm prepared for it. Have any of you ever done this? Have you ever planned a trip to the beach? And you're going, obviously, if you're going to the beach, you want the beach-like weather, right? And so you get there and it's, 85 and sunny, 85 and sunny the next day, 85 and sunny the next day. But because you're on the Gulf side of Florida, that Wednesday, it rains all day. There's no beach day that day. Some of our fondest memories are on Wednesday when it rained and it wasn't a beach day, but we watched the storm come in from the balcony. We did some alternative instead of going to the beach that day. The games that we played, the stories that we told, the things that we saw we wouldn't have saw if we would have gone to the beach. See, we can't control the weather, so we have to accept that part. But we are on vacation, so what are we gonna do? The idea that the greater the obstacle, the greater the opportunity. Remember, we're on a road trip and we're in the Rocky Mountains. And let's just imagine as you're driving down the road, you look off to the left and you notice that there's a boulder and a branch on the side with some cracked pavement. But you notice that, going, well, that was weird, that's odd. And you keep driving. And after a while, you forget about it. But if that big boulder was in the middle of the road, it doesn't appear there's any way around it or over it or under it. Now the obstacle is going to be part of the story. Now you could pull your car over and just wait for them to remove the boulder, or you could turn around and find an alternate route to wherever you were going. And that alternate route may make all the difference to a new story. See, if it was just the little boulder, it wouldn't have really impacted the story at all. It wouldn't have impacted the vacation at all. But that big boulder, that's gonna make an impact on the story. That's what I mean by the idea that we happen to be, we have the opportunity to be helpers in the midst of a pandemic. And the ones that retired 5 years ago, they didn't get to be part of it. They may comment on and give us commentary how we should deal with it, but they aren't going to be part of it because their time is not with the people that we help right now. The boulder that's this size is going to be part of the story. We get to decide how that's going to be. What are we going to learn about the dragons and the boulders in our life? That we have to give ourselves permission to learn from mistakes. If we're not making mistakes, that means that we're probably not stretching ourselves to look for innovation and creativity. I really didn't want to put this one in here because I really don't like making mistakes. I realize though that when I've had setbacks or when I've made mistakes, not that that was my intent, right? That wasn't the intent. I did everything that I thought I knew to do, but it still didn't work out and have the outcome that I wanted. But when we start analyzing what we did and what didn't go right, then we discovered things. It's already happened. The mistakes already happened. The thing didn't work out. We may as well learn from it. We may as well go, okay, Instead of having shame and guilt about it not working out, let's just not take it personal and analyze it and see what we can learn from it. And number 5, you get to decide what story you will tell. It's critically important in the midst of the obstacles in our life, the setbacks in our life, that there will be mistakes. You need to practice the self-care, that there's a greater story going on, that we're going to have to reframe some things. Because what you're doing now will be part of the story that you'll tell later. A few years ago, I don't know now, 10, 15 years ago or so, we naively went hiking up Mount Yale after about 24 hours in Colorado, meaning we didn't adjust to the altitude. Mount Yale is 14,250 some feet, which means at a certain point, we would take about 10 to 20 steps and we had to stop because we were out of breath. It was a long, it was a long walk. When you get to a 14,000, the summit of a 14,000 plus mountain, you can only stay there for a short amount of time. You're only at the top of the mountain for a short amount of time because it's about 50 or less % oxygen. You'll get altitude sickness. The 6+ hours up and the hours coming back down actually are the story, not just the summit. Similar to, as for the ones that are educator, as you're preparing for this coming year, the stories that you're going to tell next May are the stories that you're writing currently. Whatever thing that you're facing, whatever obstacles or dragons that are in your life right now, identify what they are, but recognize there will be a time period when you will prevail. And the mistakes that you make and the victories that you'll take will be all part of the story. How long we stay in that negative mindset, that'll be part of the story. How quickly we recover and get back to a homeostasis or a grounding, that's also part of the story. So when I told this initially to the students I was working with in the Belvedere School District at that time, it happened to be the first day of the second quarter. And I invited them into, if they were intentional, that they were starting that day developing the story that they were going to tell their parents at Christmas about their grades. I didn't go back there at Christmas time to find out. But if they were intentional about it, then they were conscious about the story that they were writing. As former students and educators, we know that that's how it works, right? Each grade tells part of the story. So, 5 steps to developing resilience. Recognizing and being, embracing the idea that you're called to something bigger. Disciplining yourself to practice physical and emotional and mental self-care. Practicing cognitive reframing. Giving yourself permission to learn from mistakes or learn from the mistakes that we make. And being aware of the story that you're going to tell in the future, at whatever given point, is the story that you're writing now. Stockdale realized this. Frankl realized this. Mandela realized this. Lincoln realized this. I think they are ones that we talk about because they were intentional about their actions, and that the story that they were going to tell was the story they were writing. So I have one last question identify a significant setback in your life and what was something that you learned from it.
Someone shared they learned they're stronger than they ever thought they were. If they're divorced, they learned they deserve better. Loss taught them resilience. They can do things on their own. Self-confidence in knowing themselves. Lots of responses flooding in. Addiction recovery is possible. Learning that you must believe in yourself regardless of how others see you. Becoming a single parent changed their career path, and they learned that they are meant for whatever path they're placed on. Being let go from work and learn to never lose their faith. Someone shares that the events that they were worried about weren't nearly as paralyzing as they thought that they would be. Someone shares not to worry about things before they happen. Just wait and see if it's really happening before you move on. Someone learns that they can reinvent themselves. Someone shares that when their husband was laid off, they learned they did not need as much money as they thought they did, and they could survive. They learned a sense of independence. Someone failed the test and learned they need to study harder. A great one. Someone said that learning from mistakes makes them a better therapist. Losing a parent, they have a reminder to live the life to the fullest while they're here. Pandemic taught them how to cope with things they can't control and adapt with peace. Someone shares we can all change for the better if we're willing to. Someone lost their home, it's okay to ask for help. Someone didn't get a position they had applied for and realized it probably wasn't the right fit, and they trust in faith.
Well, let's do like two more.
Sure. Losing a former employer, a great salary does not compare to peace of mind. And losing both parents as a teenager, they learned survival skills that their parents had taught them.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Again, the idea of being able to look within your own journey and recognize that those, clearly, a lot of those hardships, maybe not at the time we went when we're going through it, but later realizing that they were learning opportunities about ourselves that we wouldn't have gotten if we wouldn't have gone through it. Doesn't mean that we would ever want it to happen that way again, but recognizing that those are usually when we're being crafted in to being a vessel for later. This last video that I want to show you, when I share this video, I especially for people who are in the helping profession, I think of it as it's a gift to me. The video to me is a gift. It's a reminder of what we get to do and the ripple effect that we have on others. Because we're part of a grander story, I think this video does a great illustration to the effect that we can have. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
when we're laying on our deathbed, you're not going to worry about how much money you had, how much power you had, how much prestige. You're going to see that that was all game, that that was all an illusion. The only thing that's going to matter is the impact you had on other people's lives.
We are all on a separate journey. But the beautiful thing about our life here on this earth is at my funeral, they ain't going to talk about my success. They're going to talk about who Nick was and how Nick lived and how Nick loved and encouraged.
Success is incredibly important, but even more important than success, it's having an impact. It's knowing you haven't walked the planet in vain. It's knowing that because you've been here, you've blessed lives, you've developed people, and you have made the world a better place.
The effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. Everything you gain in life will rot and fall apart, and all that will be left of you is what was in your heart.
Life is a mirror, and life gives us not what we want. Life gives us who we are. When you were born, you cried while the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way that when you die, the world cries while you rejoice.
So that last line was, when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. The invitation is to live your life in such a way that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's the story that we can end with. That we live our life, that the obstacles and the setbacks are all part of the teachers in our life. That we are going to go numerous times around Campbell's hero's journey. And that the grit that Stockdale referred to will allow us to be able to have that impact that lies within each one of us. Again, I would leave this with you, that taking care of yourself so that you can be available to have an impact on others is most important. That is most a critical element for you to do, to complete that stress cycle, so that you can then show up the next day at 100%. I can't stress that enough. And that when we're there, I think these other things will just naturally happen because you didn't accidentally sign up for this. And you surely didn't accidentally spend an August day coming and listen to this workshop for 2 hours if you didn't want to make an impact. It was just an invitation to remind you of what you're already called into. As Pam had mentioned earlier, I've been very fortunate. Soon it'll be up on 3 years that I've been doing a weekly podcast. The majority, well, it's probably about half and half now. They're either conversations of me interviewing people who illustrate their own story of setbacks and perseverance and resilience and grit and what they learned, most importantly, from that. And then I also have a lot of just tips of my own personal reflections of things that I've either experienced or observed or I'm contemplating on, and those have been a lot of the latest episodes. The conversations are usually about an hour long. The reflections are anywhere between 5 and usually less than 10 minutes long. If those are anything that you're interested in, take a listen to those. You can get them on any play, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Play, different places like that. So I think we have about 10 minutes, Billy. If there's some questions, I'll do what I can to answer those. And if I can't, I'll say I can't. So
Sure, go ahead and share your questions in the chat. We did have one person ask if you could speak to the effectiveness of EFT. How effective is EFT?
The research that I've read about that it has been very effective. From a standpoint, it depends on where a person's at and how much they practice utilizing it. I practice it on a daily basis and then throughout the day. And so there's been research done in other countries in Europe and in Asia, utilizing it in the classroom, and that seems to work. But it's like anything, if the teacher or the provider believes in it and is passionate about it, then that in itself will help with the students. But it's not it's like many alternative therapies. It's not going to have as much of an immediate impact as it will the longer term impact. But yeah, I'd be glad to at some time, maybe in another workshop or whatever, actually talk about practicing different techniques, showing different techniques and walking people through that. I had a talk like this similar for a manufacturing company here in town, and then the follow-up, we spent almost the entire hour doing the techniques.
No other questions yet. We have lots of thank yous and just sharing how much this workshop has been helpful for them, and they found the content to be very valuable and fantastic.
Perfect. Well, if you want, I can stick around for a little bit, and if people want to sign off, I'm okay. I know you want to talk to them a little bit about their credits.
Absolutely. Give me just a moment to share some information. I'm going to pull my screen up here. While I do that, I'm going to paste the evaluation link again in the chat because I'm going to speak to that here in just a moment. So, Kevin, thank you so much for your presentation. This is fantastic. We really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you everyone for joining us. I will share we have on September the 14th, Kevin Polkey and Xavier Whitford are going to present a workshop on suicide prevention. So we hope that you will join us. I did put the link for that in the chat as well. I will share it in the follow-up email with you later this afternoon. So for the session evaluation, to get CEUs or PDC credits, you do need to complete the evaluation. So you both need to have attended in person and complete this evaluation. So you can use the QR link that's on the screen or the link that I've dropped into the chat. I'm going to send that in an email to you as well. I'll also be sharing the session recording, the PowerPoint slide, PDF version, the links to the videos in a follow-up email. So watch for an email from me. It will come from my NICNE email address or my BCALC email address. Any other questions for Kevin? I will watch for in the chat. Feel free to drop those in there, and we thank everybody for coming today. Thanks everyone, take care.